Good day, and welcome to this online policy dialogue on a circular economy powered by the single market, key policies ahead of the EU elections, organized by the European Policy Center and supported by the Finnish Innovation Fund, Sitra. My name is Stefan Sipka. I'm a senior policy analyst and an acting head of the EPC Sustainable Prosperity for Europe program, and I'll be moderating this event. So today we'll take stock of the EU's transition to a circular economy where we retain the value of our products, components, and materials for as long as possible. We use these assets in our economy as much as we can, which then has huge potentials when it comes to cutting our climate and environmental footprint, but also reducing our dependence on imports from foreign markets in the context of rising geopolitical tensions, among other benefits. A lot has been achieved thus far since the adoption of the EU Circular Economy Agenda in 2015, which was updated a couple of years ago. But despite that, we still our economy is still predominantly based on a take, make, dispose linear model. So more can be done when it comes to the regulatory framework, with the investments, with harnessing the power of the single market for the circular economy transition, together with the business community, civil society, governments, and other stakeholders. Of course, the circular economy can come with trade-offs, and it's important to ensure that the circular economy contributes to its maximal extent to meeting other EU's socioeconomic and sustainability objectives. We will, of course, discuss what more can be done in the run-up to the European elections and what should be done after 2024. So, a big topic and not a lot of time. And we have a long list of speakers for today. So I'll try to keep this discussion concise, and a kind note again to our speakers that we limit our initial intervention so we can have enough time for discussion also with the participants. First, we will hear a keynote address from Patrick Child, the Deputy Director General at DG Environment, European Commission. Mr. Child has to leave earlier, so then we will have a first round of Q&A. Then I will introduce the panelists and respondents, and we will then continue with the Q&A. I would like to encourage our participants to write their questions in the Q&A section as soon as they can, so we can address as many questions as possible. So, without further ado, Patrick, thank you very much for joining this event, and I would appreciate if you could provide an overview where we are with the circular economy transition, about the EU's efforts to support this transition, and how does circular economy agenda contribute to meeting other EU's priorities on sustainability, economy, and security.
Well, Stefan, thank you very much for the introduction, and thanks to the EPC and Sitra for hosting this extremely timely event. And I think we all say that we're at rather a key moment in the institutional cycle of the European Union, as we approach the end of a very ambitious mandate with many circular economy and industrial policy deliverables, consistent with the overall European Green Deal objective. But also as we look forward to the elections of the new Parliament and the appointment of a new Commission next year. So we have an opportunity, I think, to review a bit what we have achieved, but also to look forward to the sort of new opportunities that we can see for the future. And I'd like to start, to sort of set the scene by recalling the declaration adopted by European leaders in Grenada a few days ago, where they sort of set some guidelines for the future strategic course of action and political priorities for the years to come. I mean, addressing firstly vulnerabilities and working together to strengthen our crisis preparedness. Secondly, to seize opportunities for the European Union in the green and digital transition. And then more specifically, to concentrate on energy and resource efficiency, circularity, decarbonization, and resilience to natural disasters and the adaptation to climate change. And so we see that this declaration from leaders very much puts the circular economy as a central theme and part of the solution to the challenges that we're facing, above all with circular solutions and circularity being fundamental in helping us to advance towards a competitive climate neutral Europe. And in the environment area, the main causes behind climate change, biodiversity loss and pollution are really the overconsumption of natural resources to make the products that we all consume and use in our everyday lives. And I think increasingly it's clear that if we continue to treat the world's resources as if they're limitless, that we are heading very, very quickly towards a global disaster. And already the extreme weather events and other challenges that we faced in recent months are, I think, only the sign of more difficult things to come. At the same time, I mean, the global geopolitical context is changing and not becoming any easier. We are dealing with the Russian attacks in Ukraine, which has challenged stability in Europe, as well as made massive disruption to resource supply chains, energy supply shortages and price shocks. And we're now seeing a new and more dramatic conflict also in the Middle East. At the same time, the global race for clean technology is intensifying across the world, and we in Europe need to ensure that we have the right legislation in place and the enabling sort of investment climate to support European industry in meeting these global competitiveness challenges. And the circular economy is a big part of that. It's not just a question of ecological sustainability and helping us to achieve our net zero targets. Circular economy is also a real opportunity for us in Europe to boost productivity, diminish dependence on imported materials, and ensuring secure and sustainable value chains for the European economy. And in particular, looking at some of the strategic sectors and key technologies which are so important for us in the net zero and digital industries, as well as perhaps in the defense sector. So I'm very much convinced that the circular economy really does provide solutions and benefits for the economy with new business models that can help us to increase services in particular, boosting green jobs and reskilling of the workforce towards the challenges of the green and digital transition. And therefore, we're in a position to help strengthen resilience, our strategic autonomy and competitiveness, while also working on the modernization of European business. Now, the European Circular Economy Action Plan is the roadmap that we've established with 35 actions in 3 main areas. Firstly, our sort of product policy, promoting key value chains, and then looking at waste and how we translate waste into future value. And if I've got time, I just sort of touch on some of the highlights of these 3 main chapters of our Circular Economy Action Plan. So firstly, how do we ensure that products are circular? I mean, the flagship measure is our proposals from 2022 for the eco-design for sustainable products regulation. This is intended to ensure that all products placed in EU markets by 2030 are durable, repairable, reusable, and can, at the end of life, can be safely and efficiently recycled back into new raw materials. We are working also in parallel to the ongoing negotiations with the Council and the Parliament on the legislation to identify those product categories where the opportunities for circularity are the strongest. We will also back up the legislative text with the requirement that all regulated products have digital product passports. So really highlighting and harnessing new digital technologies in order to ensure that it's easier to repair and recycle products and facilitate the tracking of substances and throughout the whole of the supply chain, as well as giving consumers more information in order to let them make conscious and responsible choices, which is an important dimension of the circular economy, as we seek to move from a situation where we see many interesting and exciting niche applications of circular economy, but where we need now to generalize this and scale it up so it becomes the norm across the economy. And so we're working very hard with the Council and the Parliament to secure adoption of the ESPR regulation by the end of the year, so that then we can roll it out in different sectors subsequently. So the second dimension of our circular economy action plan is on supporting key value chains. And we identify a long list: textiles, plastics, batteries, the ITC sector, construction, and packaging. And perhaps I'll just say a word about the three. Perhaps the first: textiles, plastic, and batteries. Our textiles work is very much linked to our strategy for sustainable and circular textiles in order to address the entire life cycle of textile products and to ensure that we change the way textiles are both designed, manufactured, and then subsequently consumed. But if we think that today EU consumers on average discard 11 kilograms of textiles per person per year. And this is really a very, very scary figure. Even if we are able to start the mandatory separate collection of textile waste by 2025, as we hope. And we really need to, I think, to step up our efforts, and this is something that Commissioner Sinkevičius has made a particular priority, to make fast fashion out of fashion. That's why in the area of textiles, we're proposing eco-design requirements, as well as mandatory extended producer responsibility to ensure that all actors play their full part in promoting circular business models and promoting the emergence of reuse and repair services, as well as technological solutions. And our transition pathway for the textiles ecosystem also seeks to build greener, more circular and digital future for the sector, and one which we are working very closely with the industry and other stakeholders in a sort of process of co-creation. So first area is textiles. Secondly, on plastics, the Commission has taken decisive action in a number of areas under our plastic strategy from 2018. While a relatively new material, it's one that is, of course, now most widely used across many, many different applications in the economy. In Europe, the average annual plastic consumption is around 150 kilos per person, more than twice the global average of 60 kilos. And that's why I think it's so important that with the Single-Use Plastics Directive, we now have a policy framework on bio-based, biodegradable and compostable plastics. And more recently, and rather visibly, we have proposed legislation for addressing the unintentional microplastic spill of plastic pellets, as well as a restriction under REACH for the use of microplastics in intentional applications. And internationally, we're working very hard on a global agreement covering the whole plastics value chain. Third sector I just want to mention briefly is batteries, of course, very much linked to the transformation of our energy system and the push towards renewable energy. And the good news was that the proposals that the Commission made in 2020 for a new regulation on batteries was agreed and earlier in this year, including mandatory requirements for sustainability, safety and labeling, and the marketing and putting into service of batteries, as well as end-of-life management. So, and actually the batteries regulation for me is a very interesting sort of precedent for how we see the circular economy developed more generally under the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products Regulation. And so the third chapter of our circular economy action plan is how do we manage waste and how do we go from waste into transforming that into valuable resources and raw materials. And here the strong focus is in trying to double the circular material use rate, so how much of the waste we're able to bring back into valuable resources. And here we have a number of measures, including on waste shipment, end-of-life vehicles, and the much discussed proposed regulation on packaging and packaging waste, where again we look at what we can achieve through extended producer responsibility schemes, both for textiles and food waste, in order to make sure that the companies that are producing some of these products are also part of the solution when it comes to delivering a sort of circular and reuse of the raw materials. And so I think the key feature of this work is that we need to find ways of ensuring that once products do become waste, they can come back as easily as possible into the future production process. Before I finish, I'll just say a word about the single market, since that's a bit the theme of this debate today. I mean, it's a really a powerful feature of how the European Union works, and is I think an excellent framework in which we have seen on many occasions the sort of scale of the single market being vitally important in our efforts to develop new services and business models, digitalization. And here again, with the circular economy coming, I think the next sort of chapter in the way that the single market is working, we're able to make progress. And I think the good news is that by becoming more circular, the single market gains in competitiveness, resilience, and security. And that's why the Commission has identified circularity as one of the 9 drivers of long-term competitiveness in the communication on competitiveness that we adopted earlier this year. And we very much hope that if we can, as we anticipate, harness the strength of circular business models to grow resource productivity by up to 3% annually, that we can deliver benefits of up to 7% in increases in GDP. And I think that is in the increasingly competitive global economic landscape that we're facing, very important. Circular economy also very relevant in a number of other big initiatives recently in the year: the Green Deal Industrial Plan, the Net Zero Industrial Act, and the Critical Raw Materials Act are all in different ways intensifying the focus on sustainability and circularity within European industry and manufacturing in a whole range of different sectors, ranging from energy to defense. For example, in the Critical Raw Materials Act, we seek to increase and diversify critical raw materials supply, also by setting out benchmarks so that recycling capacity covers 15% of the EU's strategic raw material consumption by 2030. So, I mean, I think all in all, my concluding remark is that, business as usual is not enough. We need to use all the instruments that we have, including our very strong research and innovation potential with Horizon Europe, to change the way we produce and consume, and to find alternative materials which are more susceptible to circular economy principles, and allow and support our business in adopting new solutions. There is, I believe, a very, very powerful business case for the green transition, contributing to resilience and strategic autonomy, and giving the European Union a competitive edge. But this does also vitally require changes in the mindset and attitude of our citizens and businesses, requiring social innovation as well as technical innovation in parallel, and systemic changes across society. And I think that, as we look forward to the opportunities of the next mandate of the institutions, that there is a lot to build on in what we've already achieved under the European Green Deal in establishing the legal framework and context. And now we need to, as I say, scale that up and deliver through a really concerted focus on implementation to deliver the circular economy, which is so vital also for our sustainability and the climate objectives that we have. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for this excellent overview of the ongoing work on within the EU circular economy agenda, on particular legislative initiatives and other developments, but also the importance of having this systemic approach, because arguably that's the only way to achieve really a full transformation to an economy where, as you said, we reduce our consumption exploitation of natural resources and subsequent impacts on our climate environment, and also making our economy more resilient. I see we have a question from Knut Oye Brandsas, sorry for if mispronouncing, from the Confederation of Norwegian Enterprise. So the question is, what are the biggest obstacles right now for the different legislative measures to be adopted and implemented? And on that, I could just build, in your experience thus far, working on the circular economy, the current circular economy agenda, indeed, what were the main barriers, obstacles, challenges, or something that should be especially under the spotlight in the future work of the Commission and the EU, something that needs to be prioritized given the experience, your experience thus far?
Well, it's a very broad question, and perhaps I'll do my best. I mean, I think that the biggest challenge that we're facing at the moment is that we're in a little bit of a race against time. We've got a lot of different legislative proposals under the European Green Deal, which are all sort of competing for bandwidth and attention in the trilogue discussions with the Council and the European Parliament, and that we want to get agreement on as many of these as possible before the institutions, and in particular the Parliament, goes into full election mode, which will happen maybe in March, February or March of next year. And so we really do need to make sure that not just the Commission, which will of course play its part in helping the institutions come together, but also that the Spanish and future Belgian presidencies are able to devote the time that we need in preparing their position, and also that we take advantage of the remaining sort of active period with the European Parliament so we can get as much agreed as possible. I mean, I think if I then just focus on the ESPR, the flagship legislation here, I think the way that the Commission has approached it gives us a sort of manageable approach, in the sense that the legislative text that we presented is a sort of set of general principles, a sort of enabling framework which sets out how we think the circular economy should apply across the economy, then to be implemented subsequently by implementing measures for each individual sector, whether it's plastics or textiles or construction materials or consumer goods, consumer electronics, or whatever it is. And that means that we have a sort of manageable discussion at the level of principles, inspired, as I said, to some extent by what we've already achieved in the batteries regulation, but then with a huge amount of work still to do on translating those general principles through these implementing measures into workable circularity sort of driven systems and solutions for each individual sector. And that's going to be very much the implementation challenge and work of the next Commission.
Thank you for this update. And indeed, the ESPR being very much under the spotlight now when it comes to the circular economy agenda. I would have yet another, maybe a bit broader question, or coming back to also your point on the systemic approach. We see now that there is this growing skepticism and sort of a green backlash across the Union in different member states when it comes to not circular economy necessarily in particular, but the green transition itself, circular economy being part of that. And we have very often concerns about, let's say, the relative costs versus these absolute long-term gains. If products are circular, they can be more expensive for consumers, or they can be additional costs for the industry to adopt these models. To introduce new technologies or new skills. There are new job requirements, meaning that current jobs may become obsolete or less interesting, and that all has its impact. That there can be trade-offs. Also, if circular economy is always, if all circular economy practices necessarily contribute to all other sustainability objectives, one can hear every now and then. So there are these kind of discussions that don't necessarily undermine the general importance of the circular economy, but that can challenge it, and that arguably needs to be addressed when we are moving on with this transition. Is there something that maybe you can share how already at this point, how are these challenges also being considered? And bearing this in mind, also a related question, I know maybe it's a long shot, but are there any considerations in that sense after 2024, if there is something still more that can be done to help us overcome, let's say, these concerns or challenges, and to exploit the synergies between circular economy and all other important EU's priorities?
Well, a whole sort of bundle of questions there. I mean, and very, I mean, firstly, though, I would say, I mean, on the what you would describe as the sort of green backlash, I mean, of course, we are in a very challenging geopolitical situation, and it is natural that, with the economic spillover of the Russian invasion in particular, high energy prices, new pressures on business, as well as the very, very competitive international business landscape that we're facing, that people are asking questions about whether we are doing all that we can to boost European competitiveness and ensure that we are also able to defend our strategic autonomy when it comes to sort of dependence on external imported raw materials, resources, and energy. But what I also see is that, notwithstanding the very challenging fallout of the pandemic, the difficult geopolitical context, war on our borders, also now the conflict in the Middle East, that the commitment to the European Green Deal as being the sort of key to our sort of future economic medium to long-term strategy has remained very solid. And if you see what President von der Leyen was saying in the State of the Union speech a few weeks ago, I mean that that we really don't have any alternative but to maintain a strong focus on the green and digital transition, and that is what therefore we're trying to do. But you are right that, of course, when we're talking about big changes and transition, sort of redefining business models, heavy investment in new infrastructure, new industrial processes, there is a certain sort of time lapse and therefore a need to invest today for a better future tomorrow. And we have to think, therefore, as well as proposing the legislation which provides the right, I think, sort of legal context for developing the circular economy, that we do all we can with our other instruments, and in particular our financial instruments, in order to support the transition. I mean, we've had the big opportunity of the huge cash injection of the post-COVID recovery funds under the RRF, but we're also working very closely with colleagues in other DGs and DG Research for Horizon Europe, what we can achieve through InvestEU, the LIFE program, cohesion policy, to support both the business transition and the evolution of the necessary skills and adaptation in the labour market. But I think the bottom line is that, and it is why the Commission identified circularity as one of the drivers of long-term competitiveness in the communication from July that I mentioned, is that we do have an opportunity in Europe, building on the achievements already of the European Green Deal, of positioning European industry in the sort of forefront of these emerging markets and this emerging sort of circular economic model, which by necessity I think will be generalized across the world. And if we can take advantage of this front runner sort of opportunity, then we're doing a great service to our businesses and therefore to growth and employment in the European Union.
Thank you very much for this additional reflections, and indeed pointing out to the benefits, and also that there are other instruments and investments that can help address also any say socioeconomic costs that can occur in this process. I would stop here because I'm also mindful of your time. I of course invite you if you can stay as long as you can, but of course I understand you have also other pressing matters. So in that case, of course, you please be free to of course leave when you have to. But I would like to thank you for your introductory remarks, keynote speech, and yes, now I would like to introduce our panelists for today. If our panelists can turn on their cameras, I will shortly introduce them, and we can then hear from them. So we have with us today Lasse Miettinen, Director, Sustainability for Sustainability Solutions, the Finnish Innovation Fund Sitra. Victoria Petrova, Second and Head of Unit Industry, Director General for DG Grow for Internal Market, Industry, Entrepreneurship and SMEs from the European Commission. Alexandre Affre, Deputy Director General, Business Europe. And Esther Goodwin Brown, Interim Head of Systemic Initiatives, Circular Economy. Thank you very much for joining this discussion. And Lasse, maybe we can hear from you first, building on your work thus far on the circular economy, and if you can share your views on the current transition to the circular economy, building on what also Patrick Child just said, and also if you have anything to add when it comes to this possibilities to harness the full power of the single market for the circular economy transition.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here discussing with you on this very vital topic. I think as we have limited time, I'll jump to my main conclusion first and then unwind from that to the background as much as time allows. The main conclusion, I think, and I think it's easy to follow up on Deputy Director General Patrick Child's footsteps here. The key in my view, the key task for the next Commission and Parliament is to establish a true circular single market where innovation and economic growth is no longer dependent on unsustainable use of natural resources. And in this, I think the fundamental background is to see that circular economy is fundamentally a positive agenda combining many different strands together. It's not only an environmental issue, nor a security issue only, nor a jobs and growth issue only, but all of them together. As we know, for instance, from the World Bank last year's report and modeling, the economic potential in Europe in European remanufacturing alone is very significant. Its market could grow from currently valued 31 billion to 100 billion by 2030 and create around 500,000 new jobs. And that's just speaking about remanufacturing. So from this main conclusion, unwinding to the background, I think the why is this important is, of course, a fundamental question. And I think in there, we already covered in Patrick Child's keynote the two key areas, which are strategic autonomy and ability to tackle the ecological crisis upon us in a holistic way. The strategic autonomy part is, I think, in today's world pretty clear and stated in the EU strategy to boost its long-term competitiveness. And the well-functioning as stated there, the well-functioning market for secondary raw materials will be crucial in times of scarce resources. And that's where circular economy has a key part to play in securing European strategic autonomy and resilience. But as for circular economy's part in tackling the ecological crisis in a holistic way, I think it's important to note that while circular economy is both an essential tool to tackle both to achieve both climate neutrality by 2050 and also to achieve the Kunming-Montreal biodiversity targets. And on the latter, for instance, the modeling study done by Sitra demonstrated that with shift to circular economy business models in just 4 key sectors, we would be able to achieve globally a huge part of the task to stop nature loss by 2030 and then turn the tide to nature's recovery. But I think here's also a more fundamental part that it's not just that circular economy is an essential tool to achieve the climate and biodiversity targets, but also the fundamental case that linear economy that we have today cannot deliver those targets. No matter how much we reduce the pressures we are putting on climate and biodiversity, and no matter how good work we do in there, if the linear economy continues to work as it has done, consuming more and more natural resources and then outputting the results as emissions and waste back to nature, we can't achieve the climate and biodiversity targets. So from this basic why part, I'd move on to what needs to be done. And there, I think one issue that needs to be underlined is that the design phase of products is the phase that matters most. That is where the core of the environmental impacts are determined. And thus there's a great need to look even more closely at product policy and circular economy business models, allowing to shift the focus to what can be done already in the design phase. And how to go about to achieve the truly circular single market during the next Parliament and Commission, I would conclude by outlining 4 key policy areas here. The first one is ensuring that we have a level playing field. As the World Bank has notified us, so yes, circular economy is growing faster, but the old linear economy is growing even faster because the rules of the game are slanted towards favoring linear economy. And shifting our tax base, for instance, as the World Bank did the modeling from taxing labor to taxing materials, would allow us in 10 years to substantially decouple consumption from growth, demonstrate positive employment gains, and be largely revenue neutral. The second key policy action would be to pursue the excellent work done already in the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products regulation by setting circular criteria for different product groups. The third area would be to utilize the power of the digital tools, with mainstreaming the digital product passports to enable sustainable choices by both consumers and businesses. And then we ought to look at the requirements for minimal recycled content to be increased, as those set in the EU's battery regulation are a good example of the tools to promote circularity. And finally, to the tool that has been so much underutilized so far to actually promote the market transition would be to use the green public procurement in a much more efficient and upscaled way. For instance, the Commission's approach to set mandatory green public procurement criteria and targets in sectoral legislation, that's really important to boost the market for circular materials and products and services. Public procurement systems, they account for roughly 20% of public spending on average, and that's a huge tool to increase demand for circular business solutions, and businesses providing those solutions and enabling to upscale this market to a truly circular single market. So here I conclude.
Thank you very much, Lasse, for your intervention thus far, and for providing this overview indeed of the number of measures that are needed to help us to really advance this transition to a circular economy, bearing in mind different challenges and different angles in that sense, and indeed the importance that we fully align the circular economy and the single market and exploiting the synergies between these. Maybe I can just briefly already check. We had one question that I didn't have a time to address with also Patrick Child, but it concerns, you mentioned digitalization, also digital product passports, and this link with circular economy. In your view, based on your work thus far, how do you see these possibilities, and anything that you can maybe say more in a couple of sentences, basically the role of the digital product passports and digitalization, and what needs to be done by policymakers as well as industry to scale up these possibilities for circular economy? I believe you are muted.
A really fundamental issue that too, I think, that would merit its own webinar, and I think there's a possibility for an interesting follow-up here. But just to put it very briefly, I think we have just scratched the surface of what how digitalization, data, and artificial intelligence can be aligned with sustainability transition and circular transition ahead of us. And I think there's in this, Europe and the European Union could achieve global leadership in both sense making of how this can be achieved and how can it be turned into policy objectives.
Thank you very much for your response on this. Now I would like to give the floor to Victoria Petrova, and indeed we touched upon the importance of investments a number of times already, a couple of times now already, and also the importance of research, innovative solutions to help us achieve the circular economy. And building also what Patrick Charles said, I would be happy if you can maybe share something more about the EU's work on the circular economy, particularly when it comes to investments and research, but also if you have any other points on this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sipka, and to the EPC and Sitra for this event today. Just a small clarification to make sure that the audience has a clear picture where I'm seconded from and where I'm working into, just to, and for them to make them understand why we're talking about innovation. I'm seconded head of unit for industry in the area of Horizon Europe and research and innovation in the newly created, as the aftermath of the global pandemic crisis, HDEA, Health and Digital Executive Agency. In this context, I oversee a team that is running and supporting projects over 400, running more than 900 legacy projects with total budget up to 1 billion per year, invested specifically in sustainability, circularity, and digitalization. So maybe to bounce a little bit back from what Patrick Child said in his keynote speech, we have been working with him when back him in RTD, working also on Horizon, so that's also reminding some memories. Let me mention some of the elements that are critical and critical raw materials: batteries, plastics, textiles, waste, including packaging, new business models, digitalization. All those elements we work on daily basis. Our projects that we are supporting work to deliver on that. So before going into very concrete examples thereof, let me just remind a couple of figures and set a little bit more the global scene on, remind what Mr. Child explained very thoroughly, just a couple of elements. Global population reached in 2022 8 billion. 60 years ago, we were just 3 billion. So on this planet, it's quite a number. The global demand on resources increased 4 times since 2000. Hence, the adoption of new products and consumption models is extremely important nowadays. In the same time, we need to consider the industrial leadership, it was mentioned specifically, strategic autonomy of EU industries, and also the importance to reduce the environmental footprint on European soil. How we can deliver on that? Maybe a couple of figures of what has been already achieved. 12% of our economy are accounted already as circular already in 2021. So it's not desperate. They're already very concrete, deliverable. We can check it. In the EU, we work against a general framework of the 2020 Circular Economy Action Plan with ambitious goals to reduce our consumption and footprint and double the European circular materials use rate in the coming decade by 2030. So those are very concrete targets and figures. And we have indeed, it was mentioned, the eco-design for sustainable products legislation. The European Commission wants to make sustainable products the norm. Patrick mentioned that, and I'm repeating. My colleagues are concretely working on that. So the eco-design should be not the exception, but the rule in the European single market. So this is about eco-design for sustainable products regulation. And we aim at potentially bringing most physical goods placed on the EU market to be under this framework. There's one motto that guides our work, and this is "We mean business." Indeed, the eco-design for Sustainable Products Regulation aims to help reduce the dependencies of the businesses, allow the companies to produce goods in a way that is compatible with the current environmental and also geopolitical crisis. Let me give you some examples. In pre-COVID world, EU manufacturing companies spent on average 40% of their expenses on materials inputs. In the last couple of years, and we are seeing it also in our projects, we have the prices of many of these materials skyrocket. Closing the loop and promoting circular business models that we do also through our projects is expected to reduce not only the dependency, but also the cost that is to be borne by the companies. Further, circularity is also about us. Patrick Child mentioned it also. I think it's essential. About us buying consciously, using products longer, and sorting waste correctly. In concrete terms, legislation that was passed very recently makes already a certain types of packaging that they are to be mandatory reuse and refill compatible. The EU monitoring framework for circular economy that was revised last May, so in May 2023, allowed to identify some key figures, and I would like really to bring them because we are delivering, we're investing, we're funding projects against this policy framework. So number of EU registered patents on recycling and secondary raw materials increased by 14% between 2000 and 2009, about 2 decades. In 2021, there were 4.3 million jobs in the economic sectors relevant to the circular economy, an increase of 11% compared with 2015. In 2021, we already increased 11% compared to 2015. And the European greenhouse gas emissions from production activities decreased by around 25% between 2008 and 2021. So maybe we're not at the very objective, but we are heading clearly there too. And with regard to circularity and sustainability, let me also mention an area that is in every and each of us most likely in view, the electric batteries. You have heard about them, maybe you use them. At the last week's event of the EIT Inno Energy, where Vice President Šefčovič met actors of the batteries value chain, he met over 1,000 SMEs, corporate investors, and public actors in the climate tech. Some key elements that have been underlined at this occasion, and I would like to bring also to you, that EU and the Commission is delivered. In 2022, some key milestones have been already met. The number of announced lithium-ion gigafactories increased from 26 to 30. The share of battery electric vehicle sales increased from 21 to 28%. In some member states, it's even over 50%. There is a political agreement on the EU batteries regulation, and it is reached. Europe's batteries ecosystem accounts around 180 billion investment commitments, most of them private. And why it's important? Because we believe in the Commission that if private business goes for it, invests, that it is a positive signal and there's buying it. And then something additional, what we also deliver, we support this ecosystem. The European Battery Alliance, launched by the European Commission, is playing a key role in this context. And in 2022, Europe's batteries industrial network under this alliance grew from 750 to 800 members. To strengthen the EU industry competitiveness, the European Commission took concrete actions. During this summer, in 2023, the new batteries regulation entered into force and is an effective legislative toolbox to ensure batteries have a low carbon footprint, need fewer raw materials from third countries, and they're after it reused, recycled in Europe. Additionally, let me mention it was the so-called NZIA, so the Net Zero Industry Act provides a regulatory framework to simplify and speed up permitting, improvement of net zero technology access to markets. And the EU projected lithium battery demand is currently estimated at around 1 terawatt by 2030. And EU private investment in local battery productions will prompt companies to establish plants near electric vehicles production lines to reduce transport costs. So this is about a holistic and global view and approach and support to the industry. International, though it's important, it was mentioned before, international competition is fierce in the different segments of the battery production. It's not only about electric vehicles, it is also about the grid energy storage, and it's maybe even the more important part. So now, against this more general facts and figures and policy framework, let me give you some concrete examples what the EU funding in research and innovation is about. What do we deliver? What is in our pipeline that we manage concretely in the industry unit of the Health and Digital Executive Agency? It has been mentioned, au passage, maybe not directly, critical raw materials. Rare earth elements are part of it. And they're necessary for high-tech consumer products, such as, we have spoken about it, electric and hybrid vehicles. But also the cellular phones. Maybe many among yourselves have more than one in your pocket or on your desk right now. And they're also used for the computer hard drives, for flat screen monitors, for television. We have been connected to them over these weeks and months of the pandemic and lockdown. They became part of our everyday life. So you have rare earth elements next to you on everyday basis. So raw materials are to be reused and recycled, secondary raw materials. So the streams are to be made to recover and support their reintegration into the market. The legislation is not sufficient. We need to enable the best utilization of end-of-life items, end-of-life products. And I will give you a concrete example. We have...
I'm very much sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to check if we could possibly, I would like to also leave some time for a second round of additional remarks, also from the panelists. Given the amount of time, it would be good to hear also, and then building on that, we can come back, because it's very interesting what you're saying about the concrete cases that the EU is supporting.
For the second round.
Yes, sure, but thank you, and I'm keeping that in mind. So that is my next question for you, for sure. But thank you so much so far. And indeed, already, I think you provided quite a lot of interesting insights and inputs to this to continue this discussion also with Alexandre Affre, and I would be happy to hear from you. We heard a lot about the benefits about that the circular economy can bring to our economy, society, and environment. But I'm also, of course, curious about your perspective from the business perspective. How do you see these prospects for the circular economy, and also what challenges do you see that currently, and what lies ahead?
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for the invite. Happy to be part of this conversation. Maybe I start with a general remark from Business Europe. And speaking really for our broad membership, national federations across all Europe, very clear and strong support for the circular economy agenda. We see for years already in our constituency big effort being made by the business community and plans to continue the efforts and even accelerate efforts to adapt the business models, to develop new circular technologies, new solutions. So we feel strongly the commitment by the business community about the circular economy agenda. That's very clear for me. As all transitions, they come with opportunities, and some have been mentioned. We can mention others like this is going to bring possibly new sources of revenues, but we also heard about stronger resilience, especially in supply chain. So definitely it comes with opportunities. Yes, it comes as well with challenges, again, like all transitions. I think, Stefan, you have mentioned before as well the cost on a certain timeline. You bring as well possibly additional costs that have to be absorbed by the companies, but we also need huge investment needs into the transformation to a more circular economy. So what is really the objective is, of course, to maximize the opportunities and to mitigate or minimize the challenges. I think that's the common objective we have with this clear ambition to move stronger towards a circular economy. And in this broad picture, and linked to the main subject of the discussion today, the single market plays an important role. This is one of the conditions we need to accelerate even more on circular economy. Why is that? I think that's pretty obvious, but maybe worth repeating. It's if we want to scale up circular technology, circular product solutions, we need to develop the market. We need to attain economies of scale from a business perspective. So this is where the single market plays a critical role. And we need the single market in terms of goods, services to function well, ease as much as possible, and restrict national barriers. And here, of course, European legislations obviously play a strong role. Harmonized legislation in many cases can help a lot to create the business case for these products and enlarge the potential market for the circular products. So on that basis, what I'd like to do super quick, but is to use 3 examples how we see from a broad business perspective the link between the circular economy agenda and the single market. So using the eco-design, which has been mentioned, but also the packaging and the waste regulation. I'm starting with the packaging regulations, packaging and packaging waste regulation. What we see from a business perspective is still a lot of divergent national packaging, labeling, information requirements. Even sometimes different approach to ban packaging material. Many of you, I'm sure, know about the green dots that we see on many products. It's an obligation in certain member states, it's forbidden in other member states. So industry is facing on the single market still very different national measures there, bringing, of course, additional costs, operational costs, and more administrative burden. So even if we have some concerns with the Commission proposal about packaging and packaging waste regulation, and I'm not going into all the concerns today, but the big picture about having a regulation with the internal market as a legal basis is something we very much support to avoid this fragmentation of measures by member states when it comes to, for instance, labeling, packaging, and information. So I think that's the first example. The second example, and it has been mentioned a few times already, is the ESPR, Eco-Design of Product Regulation. And I agree with Lasse before. The design phase of the product is of course critical. And this is why from the very beginning, as Business Europe, we have been supportive of the revision And as I said before, for packaging, we are also supportive of having a regulation here. Again, to strengthen the market for the circular product, which will be coming out of this regulation. As it was said before by Patrick Schall, yes, there are certain things about the product definition or the requirements to be defined product by product where we need strong business consultation there. We also have some issues with the DPP, not as such, but in terms of information requirements. There is a lot which could be required, not always necessarily relevant for circularity. And this is where we have some question mark, but the big picture is going in the right direction here as well, to also push the single market for eco-design and circular product. And the third and the last example is on waste and waste shipments, the waste shipment regulations, where we see still a lot of barriers between member states to transfer waste for reuse and recycling. The Commission has made a proposal here, but we are not convinced this is fully addressing the main challenges about supporting the free movement of non-hazardous waste, which have to be the basis for recycling and reuse. We see still too many barriers. Digital was mentioned, so I think here we could think about using more digital forms for some of the authorization, which are still very much paper-based and take a lot of time. Permit was mentioning, we need to accelerate on permits here. So I think that's the three examples just to try illustrate where we see the link between the circular economy agenda and pushing the single market and making the full benefit of the single market. The final word is about we can have the best legislations at European level. If we don't have strong implementation, if we don't have strong enforcement of the best design legislation, it will not help. And so this is where we feel very strongly more needs to be done. We need uniform implementation really to avoid fragmentation. And we have some good, but also some less good examples. In our view, the Single-Use of Plastics Directive and the implementation provides a patchwork of different rules. So that's where the uniform implementation is not happening. And we need strong enforcement, market surveillance, good cooperation between authorities to make sure that enforcement is going properly. That's, I think, the main points from our first round.
Thank you very much, Alexandre. Very interesting and I think very useful for everybody to hear also about where the priorities lie, also from the business perspective when it comes to circular economy. And I actually wanted to come back to one of the questions came from Mr. Dimitri Korpakis on the small manufacturers and circular economy. Is there something that maybe you can still add on top of when it comes to what support, what support, how does this process look for small manufacturers, and what technical support, what financial support, or any other aspects we need to bear in mind when it comes to the circular economy transition for the SMEs and the small manufacturers in particular?
Yeah, well, something we hear a lot from the SMEs, and this is true in general, not just for the circular economy, but something we hear a lot is it's not where they need more, it's maybe sometimes where they need maybe a bit less or better design. This is about the amount of legislations that accumulates. So at least this is something we hear quite frequently also for the from the small companies, small and medium-sized companies, is to be vigilant about having regulation really where necessary to stimulate the markets for the product, but without excess and not sufficiently well-designed regulation, which can also bring to the SMEs challenging compliance costs. So that's one thing we have. Then the other thing, which probably are never enough, it's in terms of capacity building, support for capacity building for the small and medium-sized companies, where you can provide technical support as well for the small manufacturers. So I think this is certainly where Europe can do even more. And lastly, in terms of financing, I mean, public finance and Horizon Europe has been mentioned a few times. This is also where for small and medium-sized companies, it can also play a role. It's not easy for them to necessarily understand and get access to the fund, but we have examples, of course, where SMEs get access to the fund. And so public funding for research innovation activities by SMEs can be quite helpful as well in terms of circular solutions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alexandre. And then I would like to give the floor to Esther Goodwin-Brown, if you can then also share your reflections on what additional measures are needed to create a circular economy, which is, of course, in line with EU sustainability socioeconomic objectives.
Yes, absolutely. I've got a few slides to support my intervention, so I'll share my screen. And you should be able to see some slides now.
Yes, we see it.
Perfect. So as the single market is also about people, I'm going to focus my intervention on measures to support the socioeconomic objectives of the EU. And as we know, sort of studies show that the transition to a circular economy will result in modest net gains in employment internationally, including in Europe. And as one of the speakers already mentioned, we're already seeing increases in the number of circular jobs captured through the EU monitoring framework. And this is largely due to the labour intensity of circular economy activities and the shift that we will see from resource-intensive industries to labour-intensive industries, with the labour intensity of activities increasing as you move up the waste hierarchy from lower value processes like recycling that require fewer jobs towards much higher value strategies like remanufacturing that require a lot more labour. But I think important to note here is what underpins this and all of the legislation coming through is a massive labour market transformation. And it's important to note that this will involve not only transformation of current jobs and gains in employment in some areas, but also job losses, particularly in resource-intensive industries, which will require measures to ensure that these impacts are managed and, crucially, in a single market, fairly spread across the European Union. And so, as mentioned by some of the speakers, the single market has been traditionally very good at creating harmonised safety standards for consumers and environmental protection. But the urgency also mentioned around the green transition has caused member states to move ahead at different speeds and in some cases different directions. So as mentioned, specific requirements around packaging and recycling rules are being developed differently in different member states. And this can lead to market fragmentation and also hampering competitiveness and, as questioned, sort of an increased burden on SMEs in particular. So in response to this, and as already part of the upcoming circular economy legislation around eco-design and packaging and waste, there is a movement towards more harmonisation, which we very much support. And what I'd like to emphasise today is that we believe that harmonisation is critically needed on how people's skills are recognised and measures to support the mobility of workers across the single market to really support access to jobs as they're developed and they transform. And this includes in a couple of key areas which we know will be in high demand. So research and innovation, design is emphasised here today, reprocessing and recycling, and all of this critically supported by the vocational training system. It's also important to highlight here that the definition of jobs in the circular economy that my organization has developed with the UN Environment Programme takes a broader view than Eurostat's number of persons employed in recycling, repair, reuse, and rental. And the aim of this is to include and also encourage the stimulation of circular economy activities in other sectors that can help to upscale and accelerate the core areas of the circular economy, like reprocessing and recycling, and even support greater harmonization. So if we look particularly at the role of design in the context of the discussions today, and can also facilitate the greater use of products and services by businesses and consumers across the EU, so helping to increase the market as well. We know that one of the major determinants of the extent to which member states can benefit from gains that do come with the green transition is adult education. And so creating alignment on how skills and qualifications are recognized is really vital. And this includes skills that are learnt informally and qualifications gained outside of Europe by those now in Europe and wanting to contribute to the circular economy. And given the labor intensity also described, we also call for a strong focus on decent work and social protection. So particularly in transforming and increasing industries, so we can ensure that those working in the circular economy experience the same benefits and working conditions as those in more established industries. And the quote you see at the bottom of this slide is taken from an interview I conducted a few years ago, looking at how to transition workers from the Scottish oil industry towards wind energy through the pathway of remanufacturing and upscaling this within Scotland. And it demonstrates, I think, really nicely that lots of the skills that are currently used in linear resource-intensive industries, where we will see a shift away from, are transferable to building the circular economy that we want. So a skills-focused circular single market, if I can add skills-focused as well, is what we really need to harness this potential and manage people across the transition. And another nice example of this is the picture you see here on the slide from Murphy, a repair service in France that has set up a training academy that gives access to training to their workers whilst providing remuneration, and particularly targets young people with fewer qualifications, so focusing on lower skilled workers first. And finally, there are existing policies and funds that we believe can be used. So the Just Transition Funds and European Social Fund Plus to boost job creation and support research and development, to enable the upskilling that is required, and also the deployment of infrastructure for the circular economy. We see it's incredibly encouraging that there's such a momentum around the skills agenda with the European Year of Skills. And we really encourage for this to be integrated and harnessed to an even greater degree to include circular economy activities. So this includes solidifying some of the efforts towards the skills taxonomy, Sedefop's Green Skills Observatory, to include circularity, and also to pinpoint areas of technical support, as mentioned by Business Europe. And as part of this, as mentioned, we encourage a wider definition that looks at enabling sectors that can also be used to increase competitiveness and to inform policies that will stimulate jobs across sectors. And lastly, and particularly pertinent to the upcoming elections, there are ambitious new policies that we see can be developed. For example, the job guarantee, a shift in the tax base, as also mentioned by Sitra, that can lead to improved stabilization and social integration, and critically assure voters and businesses that won't be on the losing end of these green policies, so to support social acceptance as well. Thank you very much, Stefan. I'll pass back to you.
Thank you, Esther. And it's very interesting, the specific topic you tackled on the importance of skills and qualifications and the harmonization of these standards that can enable the transition to circular economy, but also bearing in mind the social aspects of it. So that is indeed important and necessary to consider on our way towards the more circular economy. Now, at the same time, our economy is very much globalized. Supply chains are transnational, and they, of course, extend beyond the EU and Europe. So when we talk about skills and the circular economy transition along different value chains, we need to think about the global dimension. Arguably, circular economy can't be achieved in the EU alone. We need to bear in mind other regions and their particular circumstances. So bearing this in mind, do you maybe have any, say, additional reflections based on your work thus far, what can be done or to actually enable this kind of that changes across supply chains, and especially when it comes to skills, qualifications, and what can the EU do beyond its borders to support the circular economy transition globally, and in particular when it comes to workers' skills and qualifications?
Yes, thank you very much for the question, because I know the theme of this discussion is the single market, but as you say, Europe cannot achieve a circular economy by itself, and nor would we want to, for the impacts that would have internationally. And I think there's two things here. There's both the skills and there's the labor impacts. And one of the things we really encourage, and we're in the process of working with partners on doing, is conducting assessments of EU policy on its trading partners. So we're currently working on a project looking at the impact of EU textiles policy on 2 key trading partners. This is obviously looking at the impact of policies that are already set. But what would be ideal is to actually include this assessment process within the development of new policies. So we know not only what will be the impacts within the single market, but also on trading partners, to also bring different partners to the table to make some decisions all around the trade-offs that actually, Stefan, you mentioned in your introduction will occur. And in terms of skills, it's both supporting those that want to be working in the European Union for their skills to be recognized, as already mentioned, but also as we build stronger data infrastructure and fill knowledge gaps that we have within Europe around the skills that are needed for circular activities, it's sharing that information with our partners and across value chains, so that other governments can also start to build regionally, but also nationally, the type of infrastructure needed to really pinpoint where the skills currently are, where the shortages will be, and then put in place interventions, particularly in collaboration with the vocational training institution, to fill those gaps and transition their industries.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Esther. And now I would like to also open the floor to our respondents that we have. I will shortly introduce them for your quick reactions on what you heard thus far, and also if you have any interesting, let's say, 1, maximum 2 cases on circular economy, good circular economy practices at this point. We have Nicole Couder, Vice President, European Public Affairs, SUEZ. Ana-Mariya Madzhurova, Legal Counsel, Fairphone, and Helena Potocki, Circular Procurement Expert from ICLEI. Nicole, maybe we can hear from you first.
Thank you very much. And it was really a very interesting panel. It's good to see so many people still very motivated about the circular economy, the Commission moving forward, supporting it. So it's great, and we need to really accelerate the circular economy in this next mandate. So SUEZ is a big company in waste and water management, but specifically on waste management, we recycle plastics, paper, wood, metals, non-ferrous, ferrous, raw materials, And we've just opened we're opening a new battery recycling plant in Dunkirk with a partnership with Eramet. We even recycle wind panels and also magnets. So that's something, permanent magnets, something that we could also think about and talk about in terms of where we're saying we need an internal market and we need to develop this market and also strategic autonomy. So those are important points. But so what we say, so how we continue to recycle and accelerate the circular economy is the extension of recycled content obligations, which we saw with the packaging and packaging waste regulation, which is great. If we look at permanent magnets, why are we not recycling as much as we could be today? Well, there's many different factors, but one of the factors is that there is no creation of the market, the demand for those recycled permanent magnets, which is the key figure, which is why we always talk about recycled content, because that is really creating the market. And so speaking of that, we need to additionally continue to work on creating stable markets for recycled materials in the EU. We need long-term policy and incentives to make that move forward. But where I think there is a little bit of more work that needs to happen is, as Alexandre said from Business Europe, is enforcement. Because I will give you an example. The theme here is enforcement and protection of European business. So I give you the example of the Single-Use Plastics Directive, where we saw a huge increase in recycled PET, and that through the recycled content obligations, of course, and that increased the demand. But in recent months, we've had a lower demand for this material. And it's because a lot of producers are turning towards PET or recycled PET coming from outside of Europe. And so this has been going on. The impact on some of our sites, for example, is that we have large stocks. So we took a look at what is the existing penalties that is written in the legislation. Is obviously it's up to member states. It needs to be effective, proportionate, and dissuasive, but this is not helping the current situation. So what is an immediate solution? Well, we believe that the Commission had already done some action in March concerning anti-dumping, punitive tariffs maybe, but what could be eventually longer-term solution on this particular example is maybe to prevent this happening is, do we include polymers on the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is something that was taken. So this notion of protecting and enforcing rules really needs to move forward, because business is not really in a good situation today.
Thank you, Nicole, for this additional inputs and indeed food for thought on some additional approaches we can take, so as you mentioned, for polymers and CBAM, and just thank you for your reaction. And Ana-Mariya, happy to hear any quick reactions from you.
Yes, thank you, Stefan, and thank you all. My goal is to give you a bit more insight from a practical perspective and approach directly at Fairphone. So since 2013, Fairphone has been on a mission to actually shape a more sustainable and ethical consumer electronics industry. At Fairphone, we design and we produce and ultimately sell smartphones which are designed for longevity, easy repair, and modular upgrades. So by making this phone, we uncover a lot of the social and environmental issues behind electronics, and most of the issues that we encounter in our supply chain, but this is also true for many other supply chains, are systemic issues, which we have identified that we alone can't change. So we work with partners and legislators and policymakers to make caring for people and planet a natural part of doing business. And I think the current status quo of doing business also requires a systematic change. You know, our whole economy is built on this take, make, and dispose system. And Stefan, you touched on it in your opening remarks. And at Fairphone, we believe in a world with a truly closed loop, a future where e-waste is reduced as a result of long-lasting products, because 75% of a phone's carbon footprint occurs during production, and only a small percentage of a handful of materials are ultimately recovered through recycling. So in our view, the focus really should be on producing less in the first place. And I think it's important to highlight as well, given the discussions on materials, that actions like recycling alone will not be sufficient to meet our growing needs and demands. So we see often that policy focuses on the reduce, reuse, and recycle activities, or on actions in isolation of the supply chain or nature of doing and conducting business. And we consider recycling a last resort, and that might sound strange. Although it is certainly important, it can only ever be a small part of the solution. Even using the best recycling methods available today, actually only a handful of materials are recovered efficiently during recycling, and others are lost completely. And I think Victoria touched on this in her presentation. Some of these materials, for example, in phones, are often geopolitically very important, like the rare earths that Victoria was explaining about. So to reduce our need for materials and to reduce waste, we need to transition to these more circular business models, starting with using materials at their highest value for as long as possible. So I think instead of focusing on recycling, we should aim to stretch the lifetime of our products. The longer, the better. And this was mentioned by Alexandre, really looking at the design and production of products. So crucially, policymakers, legislators need to continue to encourage circular development, design, production of goods and services, which can then ultimately drive and foster responsible consumption for our end users. And I think by then establishing the right market conditions, we move beyond the rapid production cycle of take, make, and dispose and drive smart consumption, and then work towards systematic change. And I think by ensuring businesses and their models are geared towards this pathway to circularity, we can then deliver on these amazing ambitions and really ensure a just, transparent, and inclusive transition to circular economy.
Thank you so much, Ana-Mariya. Helena, any immediate responses from the local community perspective?
Hello, thanks, Stefan, and thank you to all the speakers for these interesting insights. So ICLEI is a global network of city governments, and we help cities go towards sustainability. So as cities are where most resources are consumed, they'll play a key role in the transition towards a circular economy. At ICLEI, we have project managed a 4-year project called City Loops, where we have helped 7 cities across Europe implement practical 10 demonstration projects and piloted 30 instruments to test circular approach in construction waste and demolition and bio-waste. So based on these 4 years of experience and actual practical implementation, we have several recommendations to EU policymakers and national authorities. So we need multi-governance dialogue. We cannot find solutions that will work for everyone without this having different levels of governance, businesses, academia, etc., involved in these discussions. New legislations should take into account actual projects that have been implemented and the best practices on the ground. Also, as mentioned several times, we need financing. Additional technical and financing support needs to be given to local authorities so they can invest in the infrastructure needed to close the loop for the biological and technical materials. These infrastructure need to take into account the production, the operation, and the end-of-life management of products and resources. Obviously, the circular economy is about shifting towards more sustainable patterns. And we think that advertising and marketing activities should take into account the life cycle of products that are being promoted and be very clear about the environmental impacts of these over the life cycles and be further supported by the sustainable product policy framework that exists at the EU currently. Obviously, we need to monitor progress towards the circular economy, so data is essential. But it's not only the wide EU data from Eurostat that we need, we also need data on what's happening at the local level, because this is where a lot of actions happen. So improving data monitoring, analysis of local action is essential. As mentioned several times, we need to boost demand and supply of secondary raw materials. So there's a number of measures that can be done to increase collection, sorting, and reuse opportunities. For buildings more specifically, pre-demolition audits, where the scans of existing materials should be made mandatory across the EU. All these materials are wasted and have a huge impact on our environment. Also, and more specifically on bio-waste, we need to develop standards and certification for these materials because there's a lot of uncertainty and of how these materials can be closed in the loop. So these would need the necessary verification system, and having these can make improve the single market by the cross-border trading of these materials that are derived from bio-waste and energy. And finally, last but not least, we need a circular procurement practices to be put in place that promote the transition. So the minimum GPP criteria should be raised, and taking account life cycle costing throughout the value chain. And also, and very importantly, and what touching upon what Esther said, we need the professionalization of public procurers across, because often they don't have the knowledge and skills required to know which products to include and what to buy. So these are some elements. These recommendations and many others will be published in coming days. So I can maybe share with you, Stefan, the link to the project that could be shared after this event. And thank you very much.
Sounds good. Thank you. And yeah, happy to share the link. Thanks. So basically we ran out of time, but I wanted to go back to panelists and for any brief concluding remarks in 1 or 2 sentences for the way forward. Turning to Victoria Petrova, I promised that you can maybe mention some cases before later. Now we don't have a lot of time, but maybe if part of your concluding remark, as I said, 1 to 2 sentences on the way forward, you can wrap into that also maybe one more case that you think could be very relevant to be shared with our speakers and with the audience.
I see that you're a man of your word, Mr. Sipka. That's very good. So now, maybe a conclusive remark. As implementing part of the EU funding on research and innovation, we feed into policy. We gather information from the projects that are funded. I would like to bring 2 very concrete examples just to reassure the different stakeholders that the Commission itself does its homework and tides up in its garden. I will give you an example of a project that is about carbon negative circular plastics production. So it's not only reduced carbon impact in the reuse, because in this project is used less fossil resources, but it's also valorization of the recycled plastics to produce other materials for additional added value ingredients for new plastics production. This is one I wanted to bring to you. And another that is maybe more dear to the intervenant from the Fairphone, it is about SUSMAC Pro. It is about the famous rare earth. Why it's important? We could imagine that if we have legislation, it's easy to implement. You have your cell phone, you bring it, it's immediately, the rare earth elements are immediately recycled and reused. It's not that simple. It's very complicated because they're in a very small sizes and it's very difficult to extract. So therefore, we recommend, for instance, to our colleagues who are working on the legislation also in the different DGs, to consider the design of the products that will enable reuse and recycling afterwards. So those are the 2 concrete examples that I wanted to bring to you. We have many more, maybe to cross-reference to COP28 events that we are organizing. If you want to have a look at the Commission program, that's also an opportunity.
Thank you very much, Victoria. And Alexandre, maybe a key message for the way forward from your side?
I think the main point is we need to develop the market for the circular product. Demand has been stressed by a few, and for this, the only option is to avoid fragmentation within the EU, and so to really develop strong on the single market. That would be my main conclusion.
Thank you very much, Alexandre. And Lasse, any final points before we conclude?
Yes, thank you. First of all, thanks to everybody. This has been a really fascinating and forward-looking discussion. I think from my side, I'd like just to conclude with a remark that the benefits of a circular economy are clear, and the case has become even stronger in the current geopolitical situation. And therefore, just the main conclusion is that what the European Union needs now is to strengthen the transition to a circular economy during the next Commission mandate, and the real, truly circular single market for secondary raw materials and circular products, and especially for circular services, is the exciting challenge ahead of all of us.
Thank you very much, Lasse. And Esther?
Yes, I'll keep it brief. Thank you very much for facilitating this discussion. I will emphasize harmonization again. So for a circular and skills-focused single market, to really strengthen circular economy ambitions, as Lasse has just said, and do this through also exploring ambitious new measures that can really support the socioeconomic objectives, in particular, the key concerns of voters, and ensure that impact assessments are included within the formulation of new policies, not only to think about the spreading of impacts across member states, but also trading partners across global value chains to really tackle these systemic issues raised by Fairphone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Esther. It would be a futile attempt to fully summarize the entire discussion we had now, except that I think it was very interesting and very rich discussion we had. And indeed, I think the tasks are multiple. We need to consider the specific, the nitty-gritties in particular files and value chain, but we need to have a systemic approach. We need to look at the EU and the single market and the harmonization efforts for circular economy, but we need to also look at the global dimension. We need to think about environmental aspects of circular economy, but also its contribution to our socioeconomic objectives, security objectives. So there are many aspects to consider, and of course it's easier said than done, but I believe we will get there at some point, hopefully sooner than later. But I would like to thank everybody for your contributions, speakers for really valuable inputs for this discussion, and also to the participants for your involvement. Of course, we will continue following this topic and organizing discussions on the circular economy in the future, and happy to stay in touch. And I wishing you a nice rest of the day. Thank you.